Hello ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to today's webinar brought to you by sharedserviceslink.com and TIBCO Nimbus. My name is Susie West and my guest presenter for today is Nigel Kilpatrick, the Chief Sales Officer at TIBCO Nimbus. And we're going to be examining how to turn your shared services customers into fans, delighted fans. So let me just talk you through a little bit as to why we're actually having this webinar today. Being able to support the business to the best of your ability is probably one of the key reasons why you're actually on this webinar today. And earlier this year, Nigel at TIBCO Nimbus approached me and the sharedserviceslink.com team to really look into this as a goal. The goal being for a shared services organisation to really support the business to the best of its ability and beyond that ability. So we ran a study to examine this theme, and we ran that study at the beginning of this year and collated the data and analysed the data, and we have actually illustrated the findings in a very exciting infographic report which will be coming your way shortly after the webinar. You will be one of the first to receive the infographic report because you registered for and are attending this webinar today. So interestingly, this webinar, the next 60 minutes, will be really looking into some of the key findings that came out of that particular study. So it is with great pleasure I would like to introduce our guest presenter, Nigel Kilpatrick from TIBCO Nimbus. Over to you please, Nigel.
Thank you, Susie, and good morning and good afternoon or good evening to everyone who's joined. I'm not sure where around in the world you've joined from, but many thanks for taking the time out of your day to listen to how we are really driving and turning the shared services from a transactional world into a happy world. And I also want to thank Susie and Shared Services Link for doing the survey for us. And there are key things I want to try and get out of today's webinar for you all is really to look at the results of the survey. And as Susie mentioned earlier, you are going to get the much more detailed results later on. I've just picked out what I believe are the key parts of the survey for you. And then we're talking to what that survey really drove in terms of customers into fans, the 7 key elements that came out from the survey. And then trying to go into something that I really believe is we're at a huge inflection point, whether it's shared services or global business services, and I want to discuss that. And then really trying to give you some guidance into how you can turn what are your customers today, turn them into massive, passionate fans about what it is that you do. So let's start off by just looking at some of the data in the survey. So actually, we surveyed over 100 people in the survey, and the good news is that over 80% of the people that surveyed put customer satisfaction as in the top 3 priorities of their challenge of the next 3 to 5 years, which is fantastic news. We're very, very happy to hear that we're all now beginning to think that customer satisfaction is a real problem. But here's an interesting dilemma. When we're looking at asking what the key priorities, you can see that 43% of the audience rated improving customer satisfaction as the number 1. Second was how they can further standardize their processes in their business, which is fantastic. So now we're beginning to see that really process is becoming a key enabler for driving customer satisfaction. But let's look at the biggest paradox here. Surprisingly, improving talent, people in shared services came bottom. 3% of the people that we surveyed had talent as the lowest priority. 3%. But isn't it a funny paradox, where 80% of the audience said driving customer satisfaction is a key challenge for us, a key need, a key driver, and yet surely that's a happy people business, right? And yet only 3% put talent as a priority. Now that to me tells us either that there's something completely missing in the market, there's something completely missing from our desires, or something else is going on. But now what we need to do is look at what is driving this. So if we go back to customer satisfaction report, only 3% ranking customer satisfaction levels as excellent. But let's look at what's hindering customer satisfaction. What is the data we tell us? Now you can see clearly the things on the left-hand side here. You can see that too much complexity, too much variation in the processes, 48%, 45%, very, very clear. The things that are of real interest to me are those that exist on the right-hand side. empathy from shared services staff not being present, the lack of business acumen inside the shared service center. It seems to me the people in the shared service center seem to be blamed for this, but actually when you add all this up, it becomes a much bigger problem than actually forcing compliance and standardization. Actually, complexity is not the real problem. The problems exist to the right-hand side. So let's begin now to look at what, if you will solve these problems, let's look at the customer disappointment is one thing, but looking at how people look at real-time KPIs. I mean, this to me is a fundamental driver for customer satisfaction. We need to know, without any question of doubt, how well we are performing the process. We own the process, we're responsible for its deployment, we're responsible for its interaction, therefore we need to understand how this process is working. What are the benchmarks? What are the KPIs? What are the scorecards? And when we got into this, only 58% of the audience had any real-time view of their customer satisfaction KPIs. In fact, when we were in Chicago at the Shared Service Link conference about 4 or 5 weeks ago, I think there was an astounding KPI that came out of that over 80% of the audience didn't even know the result of the customer satisfaction surveys they had done. And this to me is absolutely staggering, because without knowing this knowledge, how can we continue? And a third of the audience actually had some kind of view of the customer satisfaction surveys, but actually couldn't do anything with it. So again, at the end of this webinar, you're going to get a lot of the data sent to you around the customer satisfaction survey from the infograph. But I just want to pick out what are the 7 key steps that came out from the survey. And number one, clearly, this is all about how you turn your customers into fans, how they become advocates. And number one was feedback. That, feedback is the number one thing that will help us drive and change how we get communication back from our customers back into the shared service center to look at process improvement or look at simple ways we can improve. 85% of the audience saying that feedback was a critical factor to improve handling of customer feedback. And second of all is strong communication. 77% of the audience saying that better training, better communications would really help drive a better relationship with the customers. Over 76% saying that real-time support of customers would be most valuable. Looking at better real-time support for customers, better training, better communication, improving the handle of customer feedback. But these are the what we need to do, but very often I find when I'm talking to many of our customers around the world, it's not knowing the how to do it that becomes to see the biggest problem. And I guess the fourth thing that was very interesting, and I think this is a very compelling statistic, is when we begin to look at process ownership in relation to how well that process is being performed. So we have 27% of those providing good levels of customer satisfaction actually have the owner of that process in charge of how well that process is being performed, how well the shared service operators are performing that process to the customers they serve. Or it could be around a self-service portal, making sure the interactions from the customers are rich and a single version of truth experience. And I think this is a really staggering statistic that we are beginning to see a change in process ownership in terms of what they're responsible for. And if we think about it, it's actually quite an inexpensive thing to do, because becoming a process owner, being a process owner responsible for the customer satisfaction is actually a very cheap thing to do. It doesn't cost the business anything. The impact that it can create is quite significant. Again, you look at the bottom right-hand corner here, you can see that only 3% of those providing fair levels of customer satisfaction have a process owner in charge of it. But now let's look at simplification, point number 5. I think we all suffer from a lot of process complexity in our business. The way that our shared service centers and our operators and even our customers have too much variation to try and figure out. There's too much difficulty in where to go to find the right information. If a customer of ours is calling into the shared service center and it's a payroll question, is that a finance question? Is it an HR question? Which portal do I go to? How do I find it? And again, I have a question. The shared service operator, are they giving the right answer? Are the answers consistent, even though the questions are the same? So trying to simplify all of the change that's going on around shared services is clearly an absolute issue that has to be solved. And I think that's what the survey really demonstrated. But let's look at point number 6. Again, the priorities around change management. This is one of the most staggering things that I found. People like we like as individuals to know our boundaries. We like our structures. And that requires good, strong governance, and it requires change. It's having that interaction with the customer with exactly the same experience every single time. And that is a fundamental thing that the survey was demonstrating. And there's lots of other supporting evidence in the survey you'll get later on that looks at this. And finally, and to me, the single most important thing is around people. If we are trying to turn our customers into fans, we want them to become advocates of what we do. And don't forget, we are a shared service center is a business within a business. It is no different. And I almost like it to an airline. I go online and I buy a ticket with mythical Blue Airlines. I buy my ticket online. That ticket is sent to my mobile phone. It is fantastic. I perform that transaction extremely well. I get to the airport. I've got my ticket on my iPhone. It's fantastic. I go through security. No problem at all. But all of a sudden, I've joined Blue Airlines. I'm beginning to understand that the journey, the experience of what's going to happen next is not going to be great. And guess what? I fly from New York to London on a Boeing 777, and the experience I get is not great. Imagine now I'm a red airline. I go online as a customer, I interact, I transact with the airline exactly the same way as I do at a Blue airline. I get my ticket sent to my mobile phone. I'm walking through the airport, going from New York to London on the same 777 plane, no problem at all, and the red airline has a completely different experience. It takes care of me. I am already beginning to have the good feelings about how this journey is going to be. And this is about developing talent. We must develop our talent to become customer fanatics. We must be empathetic to everything that customer needs are. We must go beyond our typical and traditional ways that we think of what a customer really is. So talent is absolutely fundamental because we are in the people business. We're in the happy people business. And I think now we are at an inflection point in the market. And I think this inflection point is relevant when we look at what really a customer really is and what we need to start to think to do. And to me, if we're thinking about a customer, we are or have that kind of culture as a customer, not as a fan. We are thinking in a very SLA way. We are thinking very transactionally. And that's not a bad thing necessarily. We know we need to perform. Our invoicing has to be at a high rate. We know our e-invoicing throughput has to be fantastic. The amount of contracts we onboard with our customers has to be absolutely spot on. No problem at all. But if we are thinking solely in SLA world, solely in transactional world, all we get is passive, price-sensitive, and unmotivated customers. And the inflection point is now we have to start to consider combining the SLA with the OLA, this operating level agreement. This is the interactions that we perform. This is the empathy side. This is the human side. And this is absolutely fundamentally key. Don't lose the sight of the importance of the SLA, but bring in the importance of equal importance, how well that process is being performed, not purely transactionally. Move away from solely wondering and considering how well the ERP platform is building for you. We have to move to the OLA and the interaction world. Therefore, we get passionate, motivated, and employees and customers just become massive advocates of what we do. And there's one thing I've coined the phrase, what you need to really consider is having solar power. Solar power is the combination of a service level world and an operating level world, where the transactions and the interactions have equal importance, where we can actually give up and provide the right data to our customers, whether it's self-service or on the phone, it doesn't really matter. We have a consistent, single, high level of customer experience. So we're not thinking solely about the customer journey as a set of transactions through the ERP system. We are actually considering the customer experience and the transactions together to really give a consistent customer experience. And that journey has a high level of customer satisfaction return if you're measuring it. So we now know what we need to do. That's clear. Now we need to understand how that we do it. And in fact, some staggering information I think that will be not surprising to you all. I think when we look at how process is done today in any organization right across the world, there's some kind of standard things that go on. In fact, when we look at this and we correlate this back to the data that's coming out of the survey, particularly around process complexity, around too much variation, around process documentation being too difficult to find, the process documentation, the processes themselves not being in context of who needs to see it. I think if we look back at that survey and correlate to what we know goes on today, I think there's a definite fit. And to me, I'd be asking this question of you, if we think about traditionally what goes on, it may look something like this, where step one, we have the traditional process workshop, which is brown paper and post-it notes. Everyone comes into the workshop and participates, but actually the participation of that goes away when they leave the room. So what you have to do, step two, is you have to convert that process workshop, you have to translate it into something. And this is what typically goes on. We create very complicated process diagrams. Look like Visio diagrams or swim lanes that really are only understood by the fanatics of the process themselves. They're not understood by the people who we first wanted to create the processes for in the first place, and that is the end users. That are our customers, the users and the interactions of the process themselves. And typically, imagine step three, this also would go on, is that if you're doing some ERP consolidation or upgrades or whatever you're doing, you probably hired a big expensive consulting firm to come in and convert the translation into a fabulously very expensive piece of paper, the sign-off, which you take on board and you create your blueprints, but actually you can't do very much with it, creating a real problem. Because the next step, step four, is then you've got to deploy the process content. You've got to give process information that you've created from the workshop, that you've translated into complicated process diagrams. Either you've embedded them into some kind of electronic SOP in Word or Visio, whatever it's going to be. You've now got to deploy that. And this is the kind of reaction you're probably going to get, let alone from your customers, but probably also from your employees too, the operators in the shared service center, who are suffering from too much process complexity. I can't find the information I need. So it's amazing how we correlate this back to what the data from the survey is telling us around the difficulties and challenges that shared service directors and owners, as we all have in trying to drive customer satisfaction. And 80% of their audience believe that's the top three challenges of the next 5 years. And this is why it's difficult to do. And you're trying to embed some kind of long-term strategic continuous improvement. And of course you can't do that. You can't go up the process maturity curve if you have got process information that you can't deploy. If you have brought the big consultants in and using some kind of standard processes, you've got them, you can't deploy them. So I reckon if this is the way the process is looking for you today, then this is probably the underlying cause of why you can't drive customer satisfaction, high levels of customer satisfaction in your shared service center. So I'm going to hand back to Susie now to do a poll.
Thank you very much indeed, Nigel. So coming up on your screen now. So Nigel was talking through the steps there that represented how some shared service organisations are capturing and mapping their processes today, and then containing and documenting those processes in a large document. So to what extent does this particular process that's just been illustrated for you right now mirror your process today? Completely, mainly, partially, not at all, or other? So we do like to get these poll question responses up to around 70%. We're currently at 50% of you responding, so if you haven't already done so, please do so. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. We're at 64% of you responding. Coming up on your screen now are the results. So we can see that just shy of 50% of you then are completely following this process or mainly following this process, and 6% of you on this webinar today are not following this process at all. So let's move to the second poll. We've got two back-to-back polls here. Now, reaching out to those of you, please, that answered completely, mainly or partially in the poll just now, to what degree will you deliver customer satisfaction or convert your users into fans based on the fact that you've got this particular mapping process going on today? To a high degree, a medium degree, a low degree, no chance, or other. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. So I think this is quite telling. So 19% have said to a high degree. that you're looking to deliver customer satisfaction. So that's actually not a very large percentage of you, really. So it's really looking at the remainder of you, so 80% or so falling into the medium degree or the low degree. So I think there's quite a strong linkage there. Interesting results. Back to you, please, Nigel.
Thank you very much, Susie. So, and again, no matter whether you're on the call and the webinar listening, whether you're trying to drive customer satisfaction or not, I think what is paramount is that efficiency becomes the name of the game, no matter whether customer satisfaction is a driver or not. But having an efficient process, an enabled enterprise, is absolutely fundamental. So Nimbus has come up and has been doing this for many, many years. But because we were acquired by TIBCO 2 years ago, we have the wonderful advantage of bringing many different facets of technology into Nimbus. And we have recently created the 21st century process-enabled enterprise that is built on 5 fundamentals, 5 building blocks, if you'd like. And the first and most important element is building a business process architecture. This business process architecture captures every process, not just the automated process. It captures the manual activities. And that is the stuff where people spend most of their time. It's interesting to understand that when people talk about process, they automatically consider process as being what is automated, what is transactional. And if you talk to many ERP vendors, they will tell you that actually 20% of what people do is actually automated. 80% of what people do is actually manual. Yet we spend all of our investment, all of our time, focusing 100% of that on 20% of what people do. And in fact, if you break it down even further, maybe only 4% of what people do on a daily basis is actually using a system. But yet 100% of our time is spent there. And yet all of the risk sits in the manual activities that very rarely get captured and very rarely get linked into the systems. And this is where TIBCO Nimbus really plays a really powerful part in helping our customers create an end-to-end process that is top to bottom, it's integrated into applications, is integrated into the correct documentations, it has complete process ownership, complete change management, complete governance, but it looks very, very simple. On the screen you are just seeing a simple common language that everyone can understand. There's one simple shape, there's a box. It's very simple to see what is the input, what is the output, what is the thing that I'm doing, who owns this thing, who owns this set of activities, what documents do I need, what links to SAP, and I click an SAP link and I'm automatically taken into SAP to perform that transaction. Very, very powerful. This is the foundations of how you build a business process architecture using TIBCO Nimbus. And the second thing you've got to do is actually convert this process business architecture into business process knowledge. Take everything you've created using TIBCO Nimbus as a very quick way to capture the right processes, get this heavy stakeholder engagement, complete governance and change management on those processes, and take that and convert it into business process knowledge. And we define this as having personalized delivery of process content that is in context for the person who needs to see it. So if I'm logging in as a shared service operator or a customer, I log in and I only get to see the information that's relevant to me. I get to see the information in a nice, graphical, rich environment. And I'm guaranteed that the information that I'm looking at as a shared service operator is exactly the same as a customer. And the customer could be looking at the process content in a different form. They could be logging in through the shared service, through a self-service portal, could be logging in through some kind of other channel, but I know it's the same information between the operator, an employee in the shared service center, and the customer. They are both fundamentally the same. The next thing you need to create is you need to understand how well this is performing. So the third element, the third building block, is business process analytics, Nimbus analytics. And I'm very passionate about making sure that the linkages between customer satisfaction and process can be very quickly measured. So you need to measure what you manage and manage what you measure. And this is whether you're bringing your SLAs in and your OLAs, whether you're looking for individual performance from the shared service center, you're looking for the metrics, you're looking for output to be linked to performance management. This is a fundamental thing that you need to do. And typically it has been missing. And this is the missing piece of the jigsaw, is analytics, real-time analytics. The other piece of the building blocks of the foundation is the business process mobility. This is where you have, from your business process architecture, you can build and deploy process to anyone, on any device, anywhere. This is having process without boundaries, but process is governed. And one of our great customers at Carphone Warehouse coined a phrase I think is fantastic, saying that TIBCO Nimbus enabled to put process in the pocket of all our employees. For many of their employees who are on the road in terms of store managers and regional managers, the only way they would access process information was through the iPhone. Fantastic. So really, really deploying it well. And therefore, you can give your process information from an HR perspective or a P2P perspective. It doesn't really matter. Allow your customers to see what they need to do from your operations, from your processes. And have the process owners completely involved, measuring all of this. And the final thing, the final part of this building block is business process collaboration. This is where you tie in social media. This is where you tie in real-time forms. This is a really powerful part of the building block. You know, part of TIBCO has a social media platform called Tibber. We've integrated Tibber into Nimbus to allow real-time communication from the shared service operator right to the customer. So if you can imagine, I'm taking a phone call and an employee has got an issue around their bank account details because they're moving from Italy to France to work, and the steps are not contained in the process. It doesn't prevent me having to wait to give the right answer to our customer. I can, through the functional storyboards in TIBCO Nimbus, I can have a real-time question and answer process going on. I can ask a question, hey, does anyone know where I can find the details of trying to open a bank account in France? And the great thing is, now to me this is a personal thing, but to me, social media, we are awash with social media applications inside our businesses. And a lot of it is great, a lot of it is very interesting, but that's about it. As soon as you tie social media into process, you convert the interesting into important. And that is a huge shift because all of a sudden you're making the communication around social media subject-driven. So only the people who have the right information to give actually provide the information to the people who need it the most. So these are the 5 core building blocks of how you create a 21st century process-enabled enterprise. And we have many customers that have done this or are on this journey. And at TIBCO Nimbus, this is one of our key fundamentals that we are helping our customers do. So you can't turn customers into fans unless you have created a 21st century process-enabled enterprise. I know there was a large percent of the people on the webinar that do the old traditional ways. If you continue to do that, I'm just really afraid that there's no way that you can go up a happiness curve of customer satisfaction journey. I just think it's impossible to do. We need to be thinking differently and engaging differently around how we think the customer satisfaction or customer experience really is. So I just want to give you a couple of examples here of how some of our customers have been using TIBCO Nimbus to drive happy people inside their organization. And I think I've just picked out a couple of things. The things on the screen you can read here. But I think the 3 things they talked about, all the SOPs and business controls are in one place. Fantastic. All employees are educated in one real-time version of the truth. But I think there's another piece here that I think is absolutely fundamental. And this is where they talk about the operation reflecting the documentation. The operation reflecting their process information. It is a common thread between what the shared service center does and how their customers interact with them. It's one single version of the truth. And I think that is a fantastic example. And so we have another customer example going forward, which is, I believe, is the guide dogs, which is, again, there's Sony, which is a wonderful story. And I think we are extremely proud of what Sony have done. I'm going to spend a bit of time on this story for you. I think it's important, and I'm a massive fan of Sony and what they have done. Clearly, Sony under a lot of immense pressures over the last 5 years, whether those pressures have been driven by some natural disasters or they've been driven, the floods in Thailand, shutting the factories, losing the battery market overnight, whether those forces against them are economic, they're market forces, so the likes of the competitors becoming into the TV market and so on and so forth, really driving at the market, driving at their ability to remain one of the biggest global brands. And clearly, they had a huge exercise to become more efficient. And there was a diktat that, they needed to change. In Europe, they needed to convert all their legal entities, 26 legal entities, into one. So move from Sony France, move from Sony Italy, Sony Greece, into one single Sony Europe. Really a very, very difficult thing to do, to consolidate all of those into one SAP code and consolidate all the SAP systems in finance at the same, and outsource finance at exactly the same time. So huge transformation, huge consolidation, and outsource at the same time. And we're only given 18 months to do it. 18 months to complete all of this work in Europe. So typically they went down the old standard route that we all do. We all go to the consultants and we say, hey, this is what you've got to do, and can you do it, and can you help us? And the typical response is coming back, well, no, it takes us 5 years to do the process workshopping, and it takes another 2 years to think about who we want to choose for the outsourcer. And, there's no time. This is a real threat. We've got to get this done very, very quickly. So I'm not saying Nimbus was the answer for everything they did, but Nimbus was really a real powerful enabler to help them do this at a massive pace and be able to meet their deadlines and then meet the fiscal objectives that were set out for them and do it all within 18 months. I think was an absolutely fantastic piece of work that they did with Nimbus. And actually at the same time, they were able to not lose any levels of customer satisfaction, lose nothing, in fact probably gain through all the turmoil that was going on. And now they have one single process right across the organization. And in fact, there was a great comment that you can see here that typical Nimbus has now become the law. It sits that layer of process above all of their ERP systems. So they're able to change the activities in the process way before they consider making any changes into the ERP system. I think an absolutely fantastic piece of work. I think the next customer example we have is Carphone Warehouse. And Carphone Warehouse has demonstrated a real strength in terms of how they turned all of their customers, not just their internal customers, but even their, let's call them the public-facing customers, the people who came into the stores. And this is quite a long-term relationship we've had with Carphone Warehouse. And when we started, the real driver was in the retail operations shared services, which we had to try and, as they came into a FTSE 100 company, they had different pressures on them. So they had very little in the way of documentation. But what they did have was many people doing the same thing in a very different way. So they went and did some surveys and interviewed store managers who'd been there for over 5 or 6 years and asked them to do a similar task. How do you close up your shop in the evening? And each and every one of them did that process in a very, very different way. So they realized they had some huge difficulties here. So they wanted to change all of that and make sure they had a single standard going through. So they used a typical Nimbus to create a standard. And that standard, radically in time, within several months, they saw their net promoter scores, their customer satisfaction scores, go up by over 50%, because their store agents had a much more time to engage with the customer, to keep the entrepreneurial spirit that Charles Dunstan was driving. But even the internal customer satisfaction, their pulse scores, how they benchmark themselves with their own employees, that grew up by over 60%. So really having a standard way that everyone in the business can find the information and interact with the information was a key motivator for Carphone Warehouse. And of course, fantastically they got an award from Gartner to do that. But I think fiscally it was a fantastic result. It drove over $18 million of new business within 9 months. Absolutely fantastic fiscal reward for that. And finally, the example I want to show you here is with BAE Systems. And BAE Systems, I don't think there's any misunderstanding that it's a very highly federated organization. So trying to create standards in a federated organization is a very complex thing to do, a very challenging thing to do. And they were tasked with consolidating 6 shared service centers into finance, from finance into 2, and had lots of reasons and lots of complexity, all the same things that the data from the survey already shows, and obviously suffered from the same challenges that we've talked about earlier. And there's a great video on the typical Nimbus website, so I'd encourage you to go and look at that and learn from that. But within 3 months, to be able to document 280 processes, have 300 work instructions, all electronic, all role-based, all delivered within a short amount of time, was stunning. Having spanning across 6 ERP systems and delivering all finance process information to 20,000 people within a 6 to 9 month time period was absolutely fantastic. So they now, being able, as a shared service center, have created these wonderful standards, these common way, the single version of the truth, with all the business controls linked in, all of the linkages off to their ERP system, other systems, all done. And now as a platform, as a shared service center platform, actually the 21st century process-enabled enterprise, they are now ready to take on more. They're now ready to take on HR. They're now ready to take on a lot more information, so very, very ready. So in summary, looking at how typical Nimbus is helping many customers within shared service around the world, there are 3 core things that we do. 1, by creating a 21st process-enabled enterprise, you then are able to create a global process standardization. you're able to have a framework in place that brings in all the governance, all the change control. It enables you to deliver the single version of the truth to the people who work in your center and the customers that you serve, and you can measure that in real time. You can bring the customer satisfaction surveys and be able to look for process improvement that drives a much happier workforce and a much happier experience for the customers you serve. And the second thing that we do is help you engage. If you don't have this 21st century process-enabled enterprise, it is very, very difficult to establish any sustainable or any real platform for continuous improvement. And in fact, that is what this is all about. We are all about how we improve. We are all about how we make things work better, and very often with the same, or in some cases even with less. But how do we do better? So continuous improvement. Because at the end of the day, the final thing that we all need to have is happy people, happy employees, happy customers. So turning customers into fans is what we are all about. And with the building blocks of the 21st century process-enabled enterprise, giving you a much richer engagement, a platform for continuous improvement, will ultimately, and without choice, drive a high level of customer satisfaction, a happy customer experience. So with that, I've probably done a bit quicker than I normally would do, but I'm going to hand back to Susie for questions.
Thank you very much, Nigel. So I'm just going to ask you one more poll, but please send me your questions now. Thank you. So coming up on your screen, the final poll for today, please, for you to respond to. On the back of this webinar, to what degree will you change your approach? So really specifically calling out to those people that saw their current process mapping approach illustrated in the earlier illustration that Nigel shared with us. We will completely change our approach. We will change our approach in parts. We will tweak our approach but generally stay the same. We will not change a thing. So if you could let us know, that would be very interesting indeed. We're at 53% of you responding. Please give us your response if you haven't already done so. Closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. We stayed at 53%, so let's have a look at the results coming up on your screen. Always interesting to see how people will change their behaviour as a result of our webinars. So unfortunately 0% of you will completely change your approach, but encouragingly 38% of you will change your approach in parts, and 54% of you will tweak your approach but generally stay the same. I'm sure Nigel will have some comments to make about that. I will go back to him in just a while, but just to remind you to send me your questions through, please, now. So I do have a number of questions, but just before I put the first one to you, what's your view on the poll results there, Nigel?
Everybody who, of the 8%, please email me, and I will love to come and talk to you and hold a free Turning Customers into Fans process workshop, because I think that's where we can make some dramatic improvements, just by understanding it a bit better. And the 0% who won't change anything the same, I think, you know, there is a journey that people have already started, and I think our experience has been that when we really get to understand the impacts and the baselines that customer satisfaction starts and ends with the process, and what it actually does for the customer, and getting the engagement back for the customer, then we begin to see a real change. But those numbers were fine. They were not discouraging. They are, you know, there are some improvements we can make, and people are on certain journeys already. It's really understanding the solar power, the impact of what solar power is giving our customers. I think that would be a great platform for us to have further debate.
Okay, good. So the 8% that said that they will not change a thing, Nigel enjoys a good challenge, so do take Nigel up on that offer and invite him in for that workshop. Okay, questions are coming through. So we've got a number to work through here. In your experience, so looking, Nigel, at the BAE Systems story, the Sony case study, who generally signs this off and who generally implements it? Who owns it within the client?
Well, thankfully, the business owns it. I mean, I think this is one of the biggest changes that we're seeing in this inflection point, moving away from the typical custodians of processes being IT departments, and who look at process in a very systems, tools-based way. And, you know, we have engaged directly with the business, the shared service directors, the process owners themselves, the people who own the problem, who have an outcome to deliver. That is where ownership has come from in terms of the engagement. And yes, some IT departments get involved to validate whether our software platform is suitable, and it's a very simple thing to get over. But really, the process needs to be owned by the business. It can't be strangleholded by consulting firms, and it can't be strangleholded by IT departments. They have to understand what the real outcomes are here. And I think that's a great thing about TIBCO Nimbus. We are giving IT departments a lot of value back because the way that the platform is designed, it's a very simple tool to use so business people can use it. In fact, if we look at Carphone Warehouse, they made business process architects out of people who were working in the store. Those people who knew the process, what it needed to be, actually became the process creators and the process managers. So it's a simple thing to do. So that's typically, well, very often how we are brought into a company, BAE or certainly a Carphone. It doesn't really matter. The delivery mechanism is always done by the business.
Okay, so some advice being asked for here, Nigel. One particular viewer is observing that for general market customers, and I'm guessing the company's customers, they're generally fine. There's the terminology we've got here. And I think that the question is that some shared services customers can be very tough sometimes in terms of agreeing to things and negotiating on things with the shared services organisation. How can, number one, any specific experience or guidance on this? Number two, how can the tool that we've been looking at now actually aid with a tough customer?
The reason why, and this is a great question, and I applaud the person that's asked it, the reason why your customers are tough is because you haven't got solar power. You are thinking, I would imagine, purely transactionally. And when all of a sudden, when you've got the solar power world, you can guarantee the transactions the shared service center is going to perform will be met, but also you guarantee that how those processes are going to be performed with a great empathy, with a single version of the truth, great consistency. When you can guarantee those two things, it disempowers the customer because you can just show, and actually when you bring the analytics into it, and they participate as a partnership, so it's no longer just a customer and supplier relationship, is a true partnership. They can actually decide, using Nimbus, which processes or which activities they want you to perform for them. So they participate in the whole engagement. They participate in the continuous improvement. And that is how you make a tough customer into a loved fan. Whoever asked that question, please allow us to follow up with you. I think that would be fantastic.
Okay, moving on. Some more questions, detailed questions. So it's obvious the Nimbus tool is a platform. What are the technical requirements? You talked about this largely being owned by the business. What are the technical kind of requirements, and does IT actually need to be involved in the evaluation of this tool?
A great question, and one that I will defer technically to someone else to give the right answers to, but I would give it a very high-level response. I mean, TIBCO Nimbus is a very lightweight software platform. The IT departments, actually are very happy to engage with our technical teams when it looks to implementing it. But you know what a lot of people do? A lot of people, because TIBCO Nimbus is not only available on-premise inside your own IT architecture, it's actually available through the cloud. So, many of our shared service customers start off using the cloud because it's pace. The problem is so severe and the outcomes are so time-sensitive that very often IT departments have a different time agenda because they're thinking about it on a tool basis. So to get started, many of our shared service customers, because it doesn't require any IT engagement whatsoever, use our cloud offering. So you can just, have access through the web to create process content. It's really that and deploy process content.
As far as implementation timing is concerned, Nigel, what are people looking at? Sony, for example, BA Systems, to actually embed the tool, get it going. How long did that take roughly?
The Nimbus software can be available virtually in a couple of days. It's not a complex thing to get the application deployed. But that's one thing. That's its readiness. The next thing is the methodology and actually the process capturing phases that you need to engage with, and that's something completely different. That is where that has come down to maybe engaging with our professional services teams to help people get up and running. In fact, to help that accelerate, we've created a lot of process accelerators all through finance or HR or many other accelerators, and that will really speed up deployment. But if we look at Carphone Warehouse from the point of implementation of the software to going live with the processes themselves to 7,000 people, that took them just over 4 months. BAE, again, perhaps 6 to 7 months. Very, very, very quick. This is not a typical long-term process consulting engagement. It's very, very quick.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well that kind of leads quite nicely into the next question. Ladies and gentlemen, keep your questions coming. What training is available to understand the entire integration This particular viewer is wanting to find out how that you can actually use the tool, the application, as an executive dashboard. How long does it take to train people up?
Okay, I think there's two parts to that question. The first part is, and I'll ask the second, which is the second part, I'll ask that Pete first, which is training. Virtually all of our customers use Typico Nimbus as part of their training. And the great thing is that obviously when you're going live with a new process, you want to be able to train people before you go live. And very often when people go through the test scripts or the UAT and then training, all of that's done through a different system. You know, you'll have Word documents for this, you'll have a different testing script technology for that. But with Nimbus, it's the same thing. So, you know, there's no difference. You're using the same application to do all those three functions. Therefore, the ability to get people properly trained and onboarded is much, much quicker. Now, in terms of giving dashboards to executives, that is a very, very simple thing to do using Nimbus Analytics. We're able to help you create the process analytic templates you want to deliver to your executives, and all they simply do is log on and they're presented to them. They don't have to go and find any information, as does any other employee, by the way. No, we totally mitigate the risk of people searching for information. We actually display and deliver up all the information they need to do their job. The same with executive dashboard, same thing. They log in and it's just present for them. It's just there. When there's a change in the data source, whatever you're measuring, it's automatically reflected in the dashboard. There's a direct link between the two.
Keep the questions coming. We've got a couple more minutes. When is the right time, Nigel, to put this in place? Is it in the continuous improvement phase? Is it when shared services moves to the kind of migration of countries and lines of business phase? When is the ideal time?
There's never a wrong time. There's never a wrong time. We have many examples of customers who have come to Nimbus halfway through a consolidation, halfway through a launch of a new process. We've had customers who've come to us after that, because then they need to understand how they can go through continuous improvement. And lots of other customers come at the beginning. If you're in flight and you've got to change your engines while you're in flight and you've got to fly higher and quicker, then you can use Nimbus very safely to make sure you can do that. So there's no real set time. I would really encourage everyone to have a dialogue with us after this webinar to understand how others have done this and what benefits they have got. I mean, if we look at the example of Cult Technology Services, one of the most recent customers, they've deployed Nimbus to over 3/4 of their business within 12 months. And they were in flight doing something else. So their benefits are being realized because they came to us much quicker. But again, there's no wrong time to do it.
Okay, final question for you, Nigel. You talked about the application really being able to empower staff and help with engagement. Just summarize for us, how does Nimbus actually help the staff? If you were going to boil it down to 3 ways in which it actually helps staff, what would those 3 ways be?
I think if you look at what frustrates people today, I would hazard a guess that the frustration stems from staff not being able to find information that's relevant to them. So what they go and do, they go and ask someone who sits next to them, or they ask another employee. And if they find the right information, they're not even quite sure if it's relevant to them. And when they get the information, it's full of stuff. You know, I've seen lots of SOPs in shared services that's got process diagrams embedded in huge Word documents and lots of words around it, so it's not engaging. And what Typico Nimbus has done is totally turn that on its head. It has a very powerful role-based delivery mechanism. So when I log in as a member of staff, it knows who I am, it knows what role I perform in the shared service center, and it also knows what information I need to see. And it prevents me from having to find it. It's displayed in a lovely, rich, graphical, high-image kind of way. So I'm drawn into it. I'm drawn in to use it. And we have lots of features and functions inside the platform itself. We have electronic how-to guides, these things we call storyboards, which is the steps that I need to perform. Very rich, very engaged, very simple. So we take complexity completely out of the environment, and therefore the frustration of what staff have today simply goes away. And they engage. And again, Cult is a great example of this. They have seen a huge uptake in the positive responses of having a single version of the truth that happens to be Typico Nimbus, but a single version of the truth in the shared service center. They know with confidence they are giving the right information to the questions that are being asked of them from their customers. They begin to engage and are happy to drive high levels of customer satisfaction because they play a part of it. And that comes from having a rich, powerful interface into which to get the information.
Nigel Kilpatrick, thank you very much for sharing with us all of the data and your advice there and your enthusiasm. Ladies and gentlemen, we look forward to welcoming you next time. Thank you and goodbye.